Look, your book from 2002, Something New Under the Sun, was a history, an environmental history of the 20th century. Now, do you see anything new coming under the sun so far, one decade into the 21st century? Is there other unprecedented, non-analog events that you're seeing to become reality now?
Yes, although I guess maybe some of their roots lie in the 20th century, but they weren't all that significant. Take, for example, some of the new directions in biotechnology. There's no way of knowing where this is going to go, but the scientific capacity for the manipulation of genes, for example, the insertion of genes from one species into another, which now is done on a limited basis and is going to be done much more widely as the 21st century unfolds. This almost surely is going to have interesting environmental and ecological implications. It's impossible to predict what they might be. In a sense, it is an experiment that is being undertaken. And while some of the capacity for biotechnology and even gene manipulation existed in the 20th century, it wasn't significant. But it's going to be significant in the 21st century. It will be a brave new world.
And in your article from 2007, you wrote together with Will Steffen and Paul Crutzen on the Anthropocene. You talk about humanity approaching a tipping point. You're using these ideas of parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. I mean, is that generally how you see history and environmental history in particular unfolding? Is that at tipping points, or do you see it more as gradual long-term processes? Or is this something completely new and different that we've never faced before?
That's a question with many, many layers to it. Historians in general, not just environmental historians, are always arguing about whether the proper understanding of the past is one that emphasizes continuities or one that emphasizes what we typically call turning points. Tipping points is a new way of saying approximately the same thing. I don't think there is any general truth here. I think there are only specific truths, and some subjects should be understood mainly in terms of continuities. Let's say, for example, the Swedish agrarian life from the 15th century through the 18th century. Yes, there were changes, but the overwhelming fact was continuity in the way that people worked the land and the challenges that they faced and the institutional organization of agriculture in Sweden. But there are other situations. Let's take, for example, the international relations history of 20th century Europe. There, the turning points leap out. The world wars, for example. And it's hard to see powerful continuities. There are some, of course, but they're outweighed by the turning points in 20th century international relations history in Europe. So my general outlook on this is no overriding all-purpose answer is possible. Different answers for different historical contexts. And I would say the same is true in environmental history. Some things are dominated by continuities, some things appear dominated by tipping points and irregularities and unforeseeable twists and turns. But all that said, in the very, very macro sense of the ecological history of the planet, the article that you're referring to makes the case that, particularly since 1950, things are changing so broadly, so deeply, and so rapidly, and so much of that change is coming from human action, that this is, in the history of life on Earth that goes back 4 billion years, a turning point. Now, we won't really know that for a very long time to come. We can only make that judgment in retrospect. But the evidence accumulating makes that seem, at the moment, like a reasonable way to see things. And that was the point of that article, to argue that we've entered a new geological epoch in the history of the Earth, in which human action is the dominant variable in global ecology.
Okay, and being a scholar of both environmental history and international affairs at Georgetown University, what insights might you have on the upcoming climate talks here in Copenhagen?
I will be pleasantly surprised if much of substance results from these talks. I say that because in the timing, December of this year could hardly be worse. We've had a year of economic hard times around the globe, and that severely constrains the negotiating room, the room for maneuver that the parties will have at these upcoming negotiations, because their home audiences, their political constituencies back home will be very unhappy if anything is negotiated that seems to inhibit economic growth. And when the economy was more buoyant, let's say 2 or 3 years ago, the negotiators would have had more room for maneuver. So the timing of this is poor. Now, the reasons for optimism, and these are not negligible, are largely associated with the change in the White House. And this should make a significant difference. The overall attitude of the American delegation will be very different from what the attitude had been between 2001 and 2008. So you can expect a good deal more cooperation and much less resistance from the Americans. But the awkward issues to be negotiated, particularly those involving the fast-growing, extremely populous economies and countries, India and China, for example, and on the other side, the already industrialized countries of Europe and Japan and North America. This will be, as it has been for some time, the most difficult sticking point for the negotiations. And from my understanding, the position of the Chinese and the Americans, and of course they've already begun to talk to prepare for the summit, are very far apart. So some sort of agreements will be reached, because summits always have to have agreements. They cannot be seen to be complete failures. But I would be pleasantly surprised if agreements of substance that significantly change the behavior of economies, states, and societies were to result. Mind you, I'm just of a skeptical temperament, and I would love to be wrong about this.